this guy, he says, I could play a gig with anyone on the globe. They would die to play with me. I was like, that must be pretty cool. And he goes, yeah, and I have a lot of friends and they're all at my level. It's really pretty cool. But you know, when you go home and you sit down with your family and nobody even cares if you're there, that's not cool. It just really takes a lot of the prestige out of everything you've attained. And he goes, and I've been divorced 4 times. I was like, wow. And that was pretty common for all those guys. So I started a studio about 1980 and built it up. Pretty much about 75 students a week, 10 percussion programs in the Valley, and played in the Philharmonic, played downtown in clubs, played with Gene Harris, all kinds of stuff. Did some road work with professional bands that would get near enough here, and I would just go to where they're performing and fill in. Taught at College of Idaho, BSU, part-time. And then I retired in 2020. I had always wanted to be in a drum corps. Well, we don't have one here, or at least that time we didn't. And then one day I was assigned to go pick up a guy at the airport who was coming in from Drum Corps International, the main head office. So on the way to BSU, he asked me about being in a drum corps, and I was like, yeah, I'd always like to do that, but you know, we don't have one, and I don't know how to get into one. He goes, well, I have connections if you'd like to get into one. So through that whole thing, I actually got into the troopers. Well, that one experience triggered things for years, most of my life. And what it was the director, even though I aged out and couldn't march, he still wanted me to be like the director. And I was like in college. So he goes, well, you could still do it from Boise. You're taking care of business and you know what you're doing, so it's not a big deal. Well, at the same time, I started looking at other opportunities. So one of them was the Aspen Music Festival in Aspen, Colorado. And so my teacher had gone at BSU, so he helped me put together stuff and apply. So I sort of had 2 things in the fire, and I was like, well, I could do the drum corps thing, but I mean, it's like all summer. And then I could do the Aspen thing, which is orchestra and percussion, not drum corps at all. So I thought, well, I guess I'll just apply and see if I get in, and if I do, then I'll have to decide. So I got in. So I called the drum corps guy and I said, well, you know, I have another opportunity, and I think I probably should take that opportunity. And the compliment he gave me that just blew me off the map, he goes, well, you know, I expect you to do what's the best for your career. We're always here. Anytime you ever want a job, just pick up the phone and call me. You have a job. And I was like, wow. Wow. So I took the Aspen thing. Well, while I'm there, I actually got to study with one of the most famous percussion teachers and players in the history of percussion. I didn't know who he was because I came from Boise and no one ever told me, and there was no internet, no Google, none of that. You know, if you read a lot, you could have found his name and looked it up, but I didn't. I just was practicing and playing, and you know. So I show up here and there's this old guy, you know, he's in jeans, a flannel shirt, looks like a camper. He's barely got any hair left and he's just kind of an old duffer. You know, I'm like, who is this guy? Yeah, no clue. So I took lessons from him, and then part of it, just you actually got to play in the top ensemble with him. And it was just a phenomenal experience. So I'd get to school at 6 and I'd go home about 10:30 at night, every day, even the weekends. So I mean, I covered a lot of material. In that, I was always looking for other opportunities that would help me round out my teaching and playing experience. So on the weekends I would play in bars, make some money. I volunteered to work drum lines, and I learned a ton from that. The more you have to offer, the more marketable you are. A school looks at the whole person to see what they're really about. If they're really good at one thing and that's about it, they're pretty low on the list. As a musician, it's even more important because as a percussionist, you've got to really hustle. It's not a field that they pay you much. So if you don't hustle, you're probably not going to survive. Yeah. As you go through life, you make choices. You can't really make any mistakes because everything actually works out in the end anyway. And you always look back and you're like, well, okay, yeah. And I had some pretty phenomenal opportunities. But if I would have taken them, I would not be sitting here today. I'd be living in New York City or Paris or something like that, playing in a huge orchestra and all that kind of stuff. And everybody in my age group that are my friends that do this all over the whole world, they're now retiring just like me. So instead of having had a studio for 40 years and all these students and all these percussion programs and all these gigs, it would just be a different gig, But I would have never met my wife. So you look at it one way and you're like, yeah, that would have been really cool. And then you look at the other one and you're like, well, yeah, but then that wouldn't have happened. And for me, one thing that really helped me make that decision was while I was at East Carolina, the middle summer between the 2 years I was there, they had a percussion symposium. And for 2 weeks, I was the driver for all the big name artists in the percussion industry. Lee Stevens, all these guys. And they were at the beginning of their career. They were all successful, but if you can imagine, you know who Lee Stevens is, he's the marimba guy. Well, he had just graduated from Eastman and was starting out. He had just written his book that totally changed history in mallet playing. And to see those guys every morning when you pick them up and they're crawling out of bed and they've been partying all night, gives you a whole different perspective of the person that you see that you're thinking, oh man, they're just such an icon in the industry. No, they're just normal people. They put on their pants just like you do, And so for me, I thought, well, this is going to be a really good opportunity to be able to be around those guys and just ask them questions, because I had lunch with them all, and I was driving them all over the place. And so every day I made a point, I was like, okay, so today who are you going to have lunch with? And I would just, hey, do you want to have lunch? Okay, and I'd have lunch. So while I'm having lunch, I'd say, so how do you like doing what you're doing? And every single one had a different answer. The one thing I noticed that was really common was they all play performances probably, at that level of player, they're going to play in 200 cities a year. So every other night almost, you're on the road playing a gig. You're just not home. And when you are home, you're thinking of getting ready for the next gig. And most of them had been divorced 1, 2, or 3 times. So now they're paying for several families. And I remember one discussion I had with an artist, and he goes, have you ever tried to raise a 13-year-old through the phone and you're never there and he has no idea who you are? Because when you're home, you're not really home. And I was like, no, I don't have kids. And he goes, it is the worst. He says, this guy, he says, I could play a gig with anyone on the globe. They would die to play with me. I was like, that must be pretty cool. And he goes, yeah. And I have a lot of friends and they're all at my level. It's really pretty cool. But when you go home and you sit down with your family and nobody even cares if you're there, that's not cool. It just really takes a lot of the prestige out of everything you've attained. I was like, yeah. And he goes, and I've been divorced 4 times. I was like, wow. And that was pretty common for all those guys. Well, after all those discussions with all those guys, I was like, do you want to go on the road? No, I've done enough of that. That's not fun. Do you want a prestigious symphony gig? Well, that would be kind of cool, but you're not going to be living where you came from. The other was just, you're not going to be around your family if you're doing a big time gig. So I was like, yeah, I'll settle in Boise. The music industry is pretty rough. It takes a lot to be successful. And there's a lot of chance to it. I mean, you talk at any name artist. It doesn't make any difference what you're doing as an artist, you're going to run into resistance. And this is really true, and I ran into this a lot. It's like, people are going to just say, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. You're never going to make it. You don't have a clue what you're doing. And I was like, okay. So the first thing in your mind is like, well, what if they're right? I don't know what I'm doing, really. When I started a studio, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know how to balance a checkbook. Credit cards were just starting out. Nothing was electronic. So to get students, it was like, how do you do that? I don't know. My teacher goes, well, go to the schools, volunteer to help, play for the students, and tell them you want to teach lessons and see if anybody will do it. And I did. And I did a lot. So over time, you build a reputation. But I mean, I can't tell you how many musicians I've seen that went all the way through grad school and everything else and either got a job and then realized, boy, I really don't like doing this. And either stayed in the job and were horrible at it because they didn't like it, or they just go, yeah, I'm not going to do this. And now they're working at Starbucks. And they're paying off a student loan. Now, I do have a number of friends that are very successful at it, but it's just the persistence that you want to do that and you're going to figure it out. So whether it was having a good mentor that they did, or they just kept hammering at it and applying for this job and that job and getting a job and doing it good and whatever. Mark Ford, he was one of those. I mean, he runs North Texas percussion department. That's like 250 percussion majors. BSU has 15. And I know Mark. He worked really hard all the way through college. But his teacher, Harold Jones, was my teacher, and a really great mentor. It doesn't take much from a person like that to say, you can do it, to make you really believe you can do it. When you have somebody that goes, yeah, I don't think you'd be able to do that. And I had some of those, and it just pretty much deflates you. So when you have situations like that, that's where the people that are not successful, they just didn't work hard enough, didn't have a big enough dream, didn't believe in their dream enough, or didn't really have a mentor that believed in them. It takes a few things. I'd say one of the critical things too is, and I read this in a couple books, and I never really believed it for a while. But one book says, well, first you need to actually dream bigger than you think you can do. And you need to write down your dreams. And then put that piece of paper somewhere where nobody else can read it. And you kind of just don't worry about it. Just, every once in a while you come back to it. So I did that. And after my wife and I got married, we're like, well, we should probably talk about our future. So we got that marker board out. We just started writing things on there. Okay, financially, what do we want to have happen in the next, say, 5-10 years? Careers, family, just all the things in life. And we're like, okay. Well, we got kind of busy, and that marker board ended up being in the closet, just stuck in the back with everything in front and stuff. And then one day I was cleaning out that closet, digging for something. I thought, oh, there's that old marker board. And it was like 10 years after we'd done that. And I took it out, stuck it up on the stand. I was like, everything on that marker board has happened just the way it was written. I was just like, well, that is the weirdest thing. And then I thought back to the books that I'd read. I was like, well, they said that was, I really still have a hard time believing that, you know? And so, you know, somewhere around that time frame, we were like, well, okay, so now we've had our careers and they're working for a while, and, you know, why don't we do that again? So, okay, you know, so we did it all over again. Same thing, lost the marker board, stuck in a closet somewhere, and about 10 years later, same kind of thing. I opened up that closet, was digging around, I found that thing, and I read through, and I was like, it's all happened again. My gosh, wow. So I'd say the most important thing is your dreams, writing them down for sure, and persistence. Because if you don't have that, you're never going to be successful at anything. You can't succeed at everything, but failure is very important. If you don't, you're not going to learn. If you're a success at everything, it really doesn't work. You get to the point where like you can't fail mentally. And then when you do fail, you're like, oh, something's wrong with me. When you have to try to earn it all the time, and you try this and it doesn't work, and you know, okay, that doesn't work. You try that and that doesn't work. Then you try this and you're like, well, that works. Okay. So it's just trial and error. I mean, that's how I learned how to run a percussion studio. You need some hobbies. So you better start developing some hobbies, because when you don't really have a reason to live, you're going to die. And that's actually what they've proven is if you start retirement and you don't have a plan for something that's going to keep you busy, in about 3 years, you're going to die. That's statistically correct. Another thing that's really pretty important is to try to figure out what makes you happy. What do you like to do? What don't you like to do?